turn to Psalm 61. The 61st Psalm, 8 verses in length, and you can guess what it's all about. It's about the rock. Psalm 61, beginning with verse 1. Hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I will cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. You will prolong the king's life, his years as many generations. He shall abide before God forever. O prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. And may God bless the reading of his word today. A few years ago, I was over in Paris making a visit, and I happened to drive past the movie theater. And I noticed on their marquee the listing of the films they were showing at that particular time. And one of the names of the films happened to be Rock of Ages. Now, the first thing I thought of was the beloved song that we sang just a few moments ago. And as I continued to drive, I thought, well, now, that's got to be a good movie to go see. Spiritual, Christian movie with a title like that. And I thought, now, I'll take Miss Charlotte out to see that movie. We don't go to see many movies, so that'll be a good one. So when I got home, I looked up on the internet what that movie was about. And beside the fact that it starred my lookalike, Tom Cruise, I saw no reason to attend the movie. It was nothing spiritual at all, and so me and Miss Charlotte did not see that movie. But I'm happy to report that our text for today is different. For our text for today is about the real Rock of Ages, our Rock of Ages. And so today we're going to go through this powerful psalm, and we're going to take a good look at the real Rock of Ages. The first thing we find in this psalm is David's hurt. David's hurt. From his words in verses 1 and 2, we can both see and feel this man's deep hurt. Twice he refers to crying to the Lord. Once he mentions his prayer, and then he tells us that his heart is overwhelmed. David's heart at this time was broken with hurt. David's face was covered with the tears of hurt. David's wagon is overloaded with hurt. David's cup runneth over with hurt. Now, what has happened to cause David to hurt so much and so bad? The reason was his son Absalom had just recently been murdered in a very brutal and barbaric way. Now, yes, this is the same Absalom that had tried to overthrow David and take his throne away from him, but even through all of that, David had never stopped loving his son Absalom. He still, of course, loved Absalom a great deal, and when he got the news of Absalom's awful death, it brought to him one of the worst hurts of life that anyone can ever feel and experience, losing a child to death. And it was this terrible and horrible hurt that led to, secondly, David's help. At the end of verse 2, look at his call and cry for help. What does he say? Lead me to a rock higher than I. You see, David knew that he was not strong enough, big enough, tough enough, or smart enough to handle this hurt. He knew that this hurt was just too high and too hard for him to handle. He knew that he was going to crumble and stumble beneath this hurt. David knew there was only one rock that was high enough and hard enough to get him through this time. Only one rock strong enough and smart enough and loving enough to see him through this time. David knew that there was only one rock that could keep his life from becoming a rock slide and an avalanche. And because David knew this, he calls on the real Rock of Ages to get him through this terrible time. Now, question, how did David know this? How did he know that there was a rock higher than he was? A rock strong enough to get him through this. How did he know about this rock? Well, this brings us to the third point, David's history. You see, David had a long history with the Rock of Ages. David knew what the Lord had done for him before in the past, and because he had done it for him before, David knew that he could do it for him again in the present. In verses 3 through 5, David shares his history lesson with us. First, he recalls how the Lord had been his fortress. Verse 3, he points to the Lord being his shelter and a strong tower from his enemy. In verse 4, he points to the Lord giving him a place in his tabernacle and shelter under his wings. The Lord had been his rock fortress before many times, and so David remembers this. And then he remembers the Lord being his family. Verse 5, he points to his heritage or his family of those who fear the Lord's name. David knew that he could not only go to the Lord in his terrible time, he could go to the Lord's family, to fellow believers and followers of the Lord in this time. So David, in his time of hurt, he remembers that he had a fortress of rock and he had a family of rock that he could go to. And because of that, David knew that his rock would not roll. His rock would not slide. His rock would not fail or fall. And because of David's history with his Rock of Ages, we find next David's hope. David gives us his hope in verses 6 and 7. First, we see his hope for life. In verse 6, he trusts the Lord to prolong him for many years and generations. Now, I believe David here is not referring to his time here on earth. No, I believe David has his eyes on eternity. I believe that David believed in life after death, life after physical death. I believe that because next we read of his hope for lodging. In verse 7, he shares his hope that he would abide with his God forever. How long? Forever. And the reason for that hope was, as he says, the mercy and truth of the Lord to preserve him. So, because of David's history lesson, and because of the hope his history lesson gives him, guess what he does in verse 8? Here in verse 8, we have David's hymn. Now, you know how David felt about music. He loved it. Next to the Lord, as I read about the life of David, next to the Lord, music was right up there at the top of his list. He could write it, he could play it, he could sing it, and as we know from the Bible, he could even dance to it. And here, what does he do in verse 8? He breaks out into a song of praise to the Lord's name forever. Now, you remember his words back in verses 1 and 2? How does he get from those words of hurt, and if you'll pardon my language, those words of hell in verses 1 and 2, how does he get from there to this hymn of praise? How was he able to do that? One reason. Because he went to the rock higher than he was. That's the way he was able to do it. He went to the rock higher than he was. He stood on that rock. He rested on that rock. And because he did, again, in his time of hell, he could sing a song and a hymn of praise to his Lord. And my friend, in this psalm, we have a pattern for us to take and follow when we find ourselves walking in David's shoes. When you are overwhelmed with hurt and grief and sorrow and sadness, you need to seek the help of the rock that is higher than you are, that is higher than anyone else is, that is higher than anything else is. And to do that, you need to review your history. You need to think back to all those times and places and ways that the Lord has helped you and brought you through. And if you'll do that, He will give you a renewed hope in your eternal life that you have with Him in His place called heaven. And then, even though you're still hurt, and even though you're still having to go through hell, you can sing a song of praise. You can make it. You can get through. You can go on. And it's all possible. It's only possible because there is a real rock of ages. Because there is a rock higher than we are. A rock higher than any hurt or any hell that we go through. And the name of that rock is Jesus Christ. And I commend Him to you today. The rock higher than we are. The real rock of ages, Jesus Christ.